I want to stay on the US riots just for now, and 7 News journalist Amelia Brace and cameraman Tim Bryce provided some dramatic live coverage when they were roughly bustled out of the way in Washington, D.C. when police cleared an area near the White House.
If you're just tuning in, Amelia Brace, one of our US correspondents, is in Washington, D.C. this morning. We're just going to replay what happened to her a few minutes ago right outside the front gates of the White House. Take a look at this.
Tear gas being used. Here we go. They're moving through again. This is exactly what it looks like. Exactly what it looks like. We're just staying safely.
Oh.
Whoa. Oh.
Amelia, can you hear us?
Now, this is a pretty ugly little incident for this news crew. This is what can happen when media get caught between protesters and police. But the reaction in our media has been way over the top.
First of all, good afternoon. We begin with breaking news. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has contacted the Australian Embassy in Washington following the assault of a Channel 7 news crew at the site of protests in the US Capitol.
The West Australian ran with the headline, Australian news crew bashed by US police outside White House. Well, we all saw exactly what happened from multiple angles, many times. And while the Australian focus smacked of the well-known media penchant for a local angle, the fact it helped an anti-Trump narrative saw it taken up by US media too, including the New York Times reporting Australia asks for investigation after police attack 2 journalists in the US. Nine's long-standing US correspondent Robert Penfold wrote in the Sydney Morning Herald, "We are all experiencing the increasing anger that grips Trump's America, and not just during these most recent demonstrations. Journalists come in for special attention. Every one of us who's attended a Donald Trump rally has experienced the pure hatred that is shouted at us by Make America Great Again supporters. Every one of us who has attended a Donald Trump rally has experienced the pure hatred that is shouted. And the president himself encourages it." Trump doesn't like the media, of course. Why should he? They campaign ferociously and dishonestly against him. And members of the public often share that frustration and anger. No one should be urging violence. I'd rail strongly against that any time. But in this case, a bit of biff with the police against a camera crew in a protest has been elevated into an international incident. Channel 10's political reporter even argued Prime Minister Scott Morrison should have raised this incident in a phone call with US President Donald Trump.
I don't know if that's because I'm also simultaneously asking questions about what the Prime Minister did or didn't know in relation to what happened to the 7 journalists at 8:30 a.m. live on air before the 10 a.m. Conversation that he had with Donald Trump. I'm trying to get to the bottom of whether anyone...
You're suggesting you should have raised it with the President?
Yeah, whether he should have raised it, whether he really did or didn't know, indeed, whether anyone in his office knew but decided best not to tell the boss because you don't want questions on this. I'm not sure.
Van Onselen even wrote a piece for The Australian making the same points. Imagine the diplomatic agenda. Global pandemic, global recession, US racked by violence, China's growing belligerence, democracy protests in Hong Kong. Oh, and can you please check in on one of our camera crews? Seriously. In fact, Van Onselen answered his own questions later with the ABC.
I find it hard to believe that someone didn't know, but it is possible, of course, that they didn't pass it on to the PM. It's also possible that it's not a conversation, by the way, in fairness, to have with the leader of the free world at the time they're in when talking about other matters.
Indeed, I hardly think it would have been top of the agenda. As it is, the 2 police involved are on administrative duties while an investigation is held. Surely that's enough. Or perhaps Scott Morrison should raise it at the G7. Give me a break. Gemma, nobody is encouraging violence against the media, but honestly, is this an international incident?
No, it's not. And I want to tell you a very quick story because I'm old enough to remember this one. You might remember, Chris, the Patrick's dispute on Australian wharfs a long time ago. So as a reporter for the 7 Network, I spent something like 24 days straight on the picket line at Fremantle. There was one particular night where as these things often happen, rumours come around that the picket, truckies were going to come and try and break this standoff, and it got very ugly. I got in the way of a police line. The police were telling us to move. I got in the way. To be honest, I can't remember if it was by design or default, but I was well and truly in the way, and I was well and truly out of the way, my camo and I, in a very short period of time. And let me tell you, those police are doing their job. And when you're a journalist covering news and you go to a protest that is as volatile as the one that journalist was at, that is part of the risk of the job. I find it extraordinary that it was that there was an inference that it was, deliberate. I've seen, like you, Chris, all of the vision that's been available publicly available to prove intent. I've been in volatile situations, many of them. I was on the road for 10, 12 years, and it wasn't a Trump rally, but I can promise you, with the CFMEU going head-to-head with the police and the Farmers Federation back then, that was a real... It wasn't a picnic, Chris, as you probably remember.
No, exactly.
And, you get in the way of a baton charge, which is what I did, and you get out of the way pretty smartly, either by choice or by strong suggestion. Yeah,
and that's what happened with this crew. That's what they were in the way of, and it would have been frightening for them. But that policeman, policeman, as he came around the corner, would not have known whether they were protesters or media or something worse. It would have been very quick.
Shouting. I think I heard her shouting media, obviously attempting to identify herself or make it clear that she was media. How are they supposed to hear that? Yeah,
no, it's a pretty difficult situation for everybody involved. James, one aspect of this, especially that stuff from Robert Penfold, interested me. Yeah, I've seen some of the footage at those Trump rallies where basically gets people booing and hissing at CNN and the rest of the media. Now, that would be very uncomfortable to find out that not everybody loves the liberal left media. But I've never seen any violence or any encouragement towards violence. And these are the same journalists who seem to cheer when we get mass gatherings on the street, booing and hissing and attacking police or whoever else.
I mean, like the amount of projection that's been going on here is just absolutely off the charts, Chris. You've got Trump there in the White House, in the Oval Office, trying to take control of the situation. You've got cities burning down, and somehow this is all Trump's fault. It's not the organizers of these rallies that are inciting people to violence. It's not, the rioters and looters themselves. It's not these various sort of Black Lives Matters type organizers or Antifa or any of these other anarchist far-left groups that have been involved with pushing people to get violent. No. It's all Trump's fault. Now, how they get around to that, I have no idea, because then they say no. It's all peaceful protest. The stuff that you're seeing there, you don't really see it. The gaslighting is absolutely off the charts, particularly when you consider that the very same left that 2 weeks ago was all hashtag stay home saves lives and attacking American citizens who went out to protest because the lockdown restrictions were so crazy and over the top in their states that they were going bankrupt and starving and winding up on the breadline. They're saying, no, you selfish people, you want to kill grandma. But now they turn it around and go, oh, it's a social justice cause now. So, yeah, that's okay. Coronavirus won't spread if you're doing it for the right reason. Come on. So
many paradoxes in all of this because of those anti-lockdown protesters were, some of them kitted out with the most awesome weaponry, frightening weaponry. They look like commandos, yet their protests were peaceful. So, work that out. Jack, on this story of the Australian camera crew, surely, sure, that they're running the anti-Trump narrative, but a lot of this in Australia surely is just generated by wanting that local angle. You've got to trick up this story as much as you can because there's Aussies involved.
Yeah, well, look, we've all covered protests and we all know the dangers associated with covering protests. Now, there is a responsibility of the journalists not to put themselves in harm's way. So, I'd be asking the Chief of Staff, actually, really tough questions about why was this crew in the middle of a violent protest which we all know people have been gunned down, there have been murders, there's been countless assaults. You're putting your journalist right in the middle of that, and then you're flailing around when people are coming through with riot shields. Find a better vantage point. This quest to get the best possible vision and make yourself the Twitter hero of the day because you think you're covering some kind of a war zone. It's not a game. This is a really serious situation. So I don't actually think it's a question that needs to be asked at the police that are going through to try and stop people burning down entire communities. I think it's a question to ask, why was a journalist putting themselves in such a ridiculous position in the first place?
Good point.